Welcome back to Out with the New, In with the Old. Today, I want to talk about driving older cars. I'll start off with cars and I'll group them a couple decades at a time. 60s and 70s cars. They're very similar, other than the reduced power that happened through the 70s. But they're basically, the same type of car, same body on frame, most of them, except for Chrysler products. Big V8s, most of them, except for six cylinders weren't real popular. They were around, and even the six cylinders can kind of fall into the category of the V8s, the way they run. These cars all made really good low end power, and at best mid-range power, I guess. Some of the muscle cars had some, higher tuned engines, but even the muscle cars relied on mostly mid-range power, unless you got into your really, fancy, high-cost Hemi 426 Hemis, L88 big block Chevys. They were meant to run at higher RPM and made their power there. But for what we're looking at just torquey, low-end cars that pull real good at low RPM. Even this 95 F-150 I have kind of makes me think of that era, just because it has a 351 in it. It has a nice, strong, low-end pull. And if you almost can pass faster by getting right to the edge of kicking it down than kicking it down. Because when it gets up in the higher RPM, it doesn't do much. It sounds better, but it's not doing a whole lot. Where before 4,000 RPM, it has a pretty good hard pull to it. But after that, it kind of goes away. 60s cars were like that. 60s and 70s cars. 60s cars were real strong down low, and the 70s cars kind of lost a lot of it. But I'd say the 70s cars lost more horsepower than torque, because they're the same way. You kick one down and it loses a lot. So those cars are entertaining to drive because of that. I mean, I kind of like that feeling, where you're almost like a little locomotive. The other aspect of driving them is most of them have worm and gear steering boxes in those 2 decades, and they're vague compared to modern cars. In fact, most younger drivers, 30 years old or younger, or maybe 35 and younger, 40 and younger, won't even know what that type of steering feels like. And I have to admit, I've slowly forgotten until I get in one. New vehicles are just precise. I mean, the minivan I got has better steering feel than a sports car of the 70s. It's just the way it is. That being said, that turns some people off because you're moving the steering wheel around quite a bit just to go straight sometimes. The car moves around more. It's a slower steering ratio. So you're turning the steering wheel a lot more in a parking lot. But I kind of like it. I mean, I think it's fun to drive that stuff. But I mean, the only younger people I could think that would relate to it are ones who drive trucks, because trucks are that way. They're actually getting a lot. Big trucks are actually getting a much tighter steering feel than they used to have, but they got the vagueness of the old cars. also, you're riding on a suspension system that's designed to be soft and compliant. They didn't even start thinking about handling until the 70s, really. I mean, Trans Ams, you know, and Z28 Camaros were getting there. They were starting to handle, you know, especially compared to what else was around. I've driven mid 70s Corvettes and they handle well, but it's hard to build confidence in one because you're sitting right with the back tires right there, and it's just driving one fast is it just, I don't know. I guess you'd get used to it. I didn't drive it long enough to get used to it, but the guy let me push it, and I was like, wow, it feels like, you know, if it does let go, it's too late. You know, it's just, and it's probably not that way, but the little bit of driving I did in it, I got that impression from it. It, like I said, it wasn't a confidence builder driving, you know, hard. And most cars in that those two decades weren't confidence inspiring, but what they did do is they usually broke loose at low speeds. Not like cars of today. You get in, I mean, you get in any kind of car with even a little bit of sporting in mind, and that thing's going to fly around turns. And those cars, you know, at 35, 40 miles an hour, you're fishtailing all over the place, which, on one hand, it's probably a safety factor, but going down the interstate at 75 and having to maneuver fast, it's definitely a liability. Because if you jerk the steering wheel around in one of those cars at 70 miles an hour, you're probably going to crash it. You're going to get out of shape too fast. That being said, they're not unsafe. They're just not like today's cars. Just things to keep in mind, especially in the rain. They're still good cars. They're still fun to drive. They're still safe. Their limitations are just quite stunted compared to what's on the road today. And it's like anything else. As long as you know its limitations, you're fine. We'll move on to the 80s and 90s cars, and that's a huge step, especially in what we just talked about, handling. Cars started to handle decent. In the 80s, they still had the smaller wheel tire packages, but they were getting a lot better. You get in a Z28 or Trans Am of the 80s, and they handle good. I mean, even by today's standards, I think they handle pretty damn good. And they get better as you get into the 90s. I mean, for me, they handle like race cars, but I'm sure the younger people that have driven a lot of modern stuff and driven it fast might disagree. I'm sure they would disagree. You know, they got more experience in driving those kind of cars, and a lot of my experience is from decades before. So, of course, you know, stuff from the late 90s is going to be like a race car to me. C4 Corvettes, I mean, and I think they still do handle well. I mean, even by modern standards, they're extremely good handling cars. I like them mainly because I think they got a good style, and number two, they're cheap. You can still get one of those cheap, and it's a Chevy. So if you want a sports car, and you can find them under 10 grand, I mean, you're going to probably have to do stuff to it, but they're not that bad to do stuff to. Like I said, it's a Chevy. So it's actually a fun car to get into if you want a cheap sports car. And, you know, people can say, oh, you know, they're not that fat. You know how easy it is to get extra power out of a small block Chevy? It's pretty easy and it's pretty cheap. So you can make the car respectable. I think they're respectable, especially with a standard trans anyway. But if that isn't enough, you can make it a lot more real easy. I'm not talking about turbochargers. I'm just talking about mild mods that can wake it up. So your cars in your, you know, 80s and 90s, they're probably not going to be quite at the same level as today, but they're pretty good. I mean, they're pretty damn good. They're pretty safe. They handle good. They get a lot better fuel mileage. they lost most of their big V8s and got V6s and 4 cylinders. So you're not riding on that wave of low end power anymore in most of them. You're riding on mid range and top end power. Probably not so much top end power, but a lot more mid range power. Those cars, they have to downshift to pass, where the old ones almost did better not downshifting to pass. But they're generally reliable, good running cars. And driving them, it's kind of fun. I mean, even that old minivan, well, that's a 2003, so I really not. It's basically a 90s design, though. My 95 F-150, that's basically a 60s design that just stayed, around for 30 years. It's a truck that floats like a luxury car, is like how I like to put it. The F-150. I mean, it's for its day, it was probably the smoothest riding pickup. It's fun to drive, and for the reasons I stated in the 70s and 80s category, because that truck is kind of antiquated. Even though it's a 95, its roots go so far back that you feel like you're driving something from the 70s almost. But they just kept selling them, so why not? Anyway, I got off track there. Yeah, driving the 90s or the 80s and 90s cars in most cases isn't going to be as entertaining, but it's entertaining in its own way. The 60s and 70s cars are definitely entertaining, keep you involved, keep you awake. You can relax a little more in them. They have the more modern steering, and the handling's a lot better. And V6s can be entertaining. Hell, they had some high wrapping. Like, I remember a buddy of mine had an Oldsmobile Cutlass with the quad 4 engine in it, and with the standard trans. And that thing, I mean, I don't know if it was fast, but it seemed entertaining. It kind of wrapped up high and took off. It was not what I was really into, but it did good for the era. Performance was definitely coming on in the 90s. By the late 90s, it was cars were getting pretty damn hot. Even regular cars were doing a lot better. Anyway, I just wanted to go over a couple driving points on the old cars, things to be aware of when you get one. And I talked in terms of these cars being in good shape, not being wore out cars. So that you have to determine by, physically looking at it. Anyway, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you like the content.